I prepared some slides. I assume that, well, many of you have received also articles that were sent to you in advance, and you have some already, some notions or more than certain notions of SDT, but I wanted to focus today especially on work that has been done here around the teaching compass. And so just to have, let's say, a similar knowledge or also vocabulary to talk about these things, I prepared a number of slides in that respect. So I'm going to try to share this with you. I don't know whether you can now see my PowerPoint presentation, right?
Yes, it's all good.
Okay, great. So I want to introduce the teaching compass, which is actually central in a book which is just launched here in Belgium. It's written in Dutch, but we are looking for ways to get it translated also in English. The book entitled in English is The ABC of Motivation in Education. And so I think I want to, the goal of today from my perspective is twofold. On the one hand, I think I want to give you an insight in what the teaching compass involves exactly. And second, I guess, yeah, we can engage in a discussion both about the theory of SDT, how maybe in one way or the other it provides some more nuanced insights in some of the things, but also how the teaching compass could be relevant on a day-to-day basis for teachers, for school principals, and how it could be made useful to improve our educational quality in general. And I want to start off, I think, with introducing a new measurement, because I think at the time, and I recall John Marshall is here also in the audience, back in 2012, when you were here with us, John Marshall, on a moment, you were part of the evaluation committee of Eileen Sierens. We were thinking of developing a new measure to assess different teaching styles. And rather than assessing teaching style with what we call generic items, we wanted to start with a specific situation which would make it more realistic, authentic, easier to relate to from the side of teachers. And I think items we have been using a lot before are items like, my teacher provides me choice, but then it's not clear what kind of choices are we talking about in which situation. So in a way, we wanted to make it more situation bounded. I think there are pros and cons of that choice, but at the time we thought this was a wise choice. And so we came up with a set of situations which were pretty representative for the way how teachers were interacting with pupils. Some of these situations had to do with problems they were encountering in their classes. Others were not directly problem related, but were more focused on improving motivation. But I'm taking here this example where students complain at a difficult point in the lesson. And the question is, how does the teacher respond? And so in the teacher version, the teacher could endorse each of these 4 different options, each of these 4 different reactions. We also have a child version or a pupil version where the pupil or the student is indicating how the teacher responds to such a situation. And I think, so that was one thing we tried to do. The other thing is, let's try to measure here different styles at the same time. So what is autonomy support in this situation? What's structure in the situation? What's chaos? And what's being controlling? And I think you could easily link each of these styles to the different responses. If you accept the negative feelings and you're open for inputs, it would be a more autonomy supportive perspective. You're taking the frame of reference of the other person, of the student, to try to understand what is in the way for them, why they are complaining in the first place. The controlling approach would be one where you insist they behave well. They have to learn for their own good. It's something we often hear, also in Belgium here. Yeah, it's for your own good. You'll understand later on in your life why you needed to do this. Just get it done. So it's a controlling way of handling the situation. And then you could also provide them a strategy and teach them how to deal with the situation so they feel more competent, capable. And that involves a step-by-step approach, for instance, which would be structure. And then you would you could also adjust in the complaining and think like, okay, they need to handle this independently, so you don't provide any help or guidance whatsoever, but you basically give up on them, and okay, you try to move on. And so we had, this is just one situation, but we had 15 of these situations, and we went through really a lot of pilot testing. I think we went through, because we need to make sure the situations were sufficiently ecologically valid, people could relate to them, they were realistic. And in the end, well, we ended up with 12 to 15 situations, and we applied a different way of analyzing them rather than, let's say, classic factor structures. In this case, it would be indeed a multidimensional scaling analysis. And what you can see here is that this creates a structure here which is circular. You see the different items falling into a circular structure, and you have certain areas, which one of them being autonomy support, the other control, the other structure, and the last one would be chaos. There's something here with my, I'm not pushing on any button, but this moves automatically my animated my animation. But anyway, it's kind of interesting. It does it by itself. So this is the overall structure. Here you see it, and I think already at this point you can see that autonomy, support, and structure are next to each other in the circumplex, in the circle. So it implies indeed they can easily go hand in hand. The teacher who is autonomy supportive is often also structuring, while, for instance, structure is in opposition to chaos, which are more incompatible or even conflicting styles, and the same is true for autonomy, support, and control. But then if you looked at the items in a more detailed manner, you could see there are actually 8 different areas, 8 different styles, so to speak. And autonomy support then falls apart in what is called participative, which would involve things like offering choice, getting into a dialogue or a discussion, being more interactive, giving a voice to children. Attuning would imply that you try to attune the learning material, for instance, to the interests of the children. Or you give a rationale for why you are actually assigning homework, to give that example. So it's a rationale attuned to the perspective of the child. Or you try to indeed respond in a very, you try to respond in an engaging or accepting way when a student is complaining, when they show resistance. So you also try to attune to the perspective. That's, I think, the reason why this is called attuning, because each of these building blocks implies that you try to indeed go along with the perspective of the other person, which doesn't necessarily mean you need to give in, but you try to at least hear what's going on for that other person. And then structure would also fall apart in 2 parts. The one being more process-oriented, which is guidance along the way, in terms of modeling what you ask from the students, giving good examples. Also scaffolding, providing feedback, being positive and encouraging children to persist, so that the guiding style and the clarifying style is more, you try to be clear what are the outcomes or the goals you try to strive for today, what's the basic structure of your class, how is it built up. So the children have some overview of what's going on and where they are moving to. And then next to structure, we have control, which could be either domineering or demanding. And if you are demanding, it implies that you are really demanding certain behaviors. You are not tolerating, for instance, children that are distracting others, and you can be fairly harsh regarding, let's say, this wrong behavior, threatening them with sanctions, using controlling language. If you're domineering, you shift away more from what is wrong in terms of the behavior to invalidating the person and being domineering, attacking the child altogether. And this could be done in different ways. It's like guilt induction. It would be shame. It would be, well, really attacking the child. So the self-worth is undermined altogether, and the child feels like completely worthless on that moment, and pressured or cornered into changing his or her behavior. So this is really interesting. This goes all, it's AI built into my presentation, I guess. But and then you have chaos, which is either being abandoning. So you give up the child, you no longer invest in it. And I think the example we had before is the complaining children. You don't show any interest anymore. You just give it up. And you could also be a weighting. A weighting is more, maybe the children need some guidance, some structure from your side, but you're too open in the way how you introduce learning tasks, and they feel like, yeah, this is hard for them to make sense of the situation. So they are left a bit by themselves because you're creating giving too much space in that respect. And so, well, these are 8 different styles. And yeah, we could, of course, wonder, so how can we now best summarize this model? And I think you have here the horizontal axis, but on the right hand, you see need supportive styles. They are very much satisfying or supporting all 3 needs: autonomy, competence, relatedness when you're tuning and guiding. And you're undermining all 3 needs on the left side when you're abandoning or domineering. And then we faced also the challenge to come up with a name for the vertical axis, because the horizontal axis was pretty clear in terms of the name we wanted to propose, but the vertical axis was then, so how would we label this axis? And so we came up with the term directiveness. And so the teacher is highly directive at the bottom when he or she is either demanding or clarifying, or could be very low on directiveness when he or she is awaiting or participative. So there are different ways to be low on directiveness or to be high on directiveness. And there are different ways to be need supportive and different ways to be need thwarting in that respect. And so this basic structure was actually replicated in a number of other areas. And I want to show this also in higher education, for instance, in sports, you see the circular structure in parenting. So we have been able to, well, replicate this basic phenomena there with some variations around it. And then in some of the studies, in this case, this was a study done with students who at the end of the school year were asked, so if you now think back about how your most important teacher, I can't come up with a name for it in English, but it's like we have the primary teacher for students in secondary education. How was this person teaching this year? So if you look back and they fill in the questionnaire with the situations I showed you in the beginning, having that specific teacher in mind. So they indicated to what extent is the teacher attuning, guiding, and so on. And we also asked them a set of questions about their motivation for school that year, autonomous, controlled, a motivation, but also how they looked at their primary teacher. And we asked questions like, okay, do you want to stay with, if you had a chance to again have classes of this teacher next year, would you want to have classes of this same person? Or would you recommend this person to other students? And what you can see here is really a pattern of correlations. It's in a way fairly simple correlations between what the students were saying about the style of the teacher on the one hand and the evaluation of that teacher. And you can see that they had top scores when the teacher was perceived to be attuning and guiding. You have very strong positive correlations. And then this gradually goes down. Clarifying is a bit less positive, demanding becomes slightly negative, domineering, then the teacher gets really negatively evaluated, and is even more true for the abandoning approach. But then again, the awaiting, it's a zero correlation, and with the participative, you have a slight positive association. So of course, this gradual pattern of correlates fits completely with the position of the style within the circumplex. And you see a gradual shift in the strength of associations going from highly positive to highly negative as we move along the circumplex. This is the same is here the case for other outcomes. This is a figure out of the book, the Dutch book. So you have autonomous motivation, which is in red, and a motivation in gray, but you can see the domineering, the abandoning are the ones where children would give up if their teacher had been abandoning and domineering. These are data collected by Paul Evans in Australia, where you see the associations with school results, self-reported or objectively recorded. So you see the same pattern of changing correlates. And of course, this is very similar to what we have seen also with the work of Rich Ryan in the past, about in the early years, so to speak, of SDT in organismic integration theory, where you see the different subtypes on the continuum changing gradually if you move from a motivation to intrinsic motivation. So that same gradual pattern, you see it now here reflected in the way how styles relate to outcomes. And then I think we can move from such a data-driven approach to a more nicer figure. This is also now in Dutch, but you see the colors reflecting the different styles. And we talk about the compass because, yeah, really what the data tell us is it's very critical to be need supportive, which is a point, of course, made over and over in SDT. But what you see, it's not so much the level of directiveness that matters when teachers want to promote motivation and learning. It's about the level of need support that matters. So because there are adaptive ways to be directive, which would be structure, but there are less adaptive ways to be highly directive, that would be control or being demanding. Then there are adaptive ways to leave, let's say, some direction to or responsibilities to students to transfer to them, which would be participative. But in some cases, yeah, this may be turned, if wrongly applied, into chaos. And on that moment, yeah, chaos is of course not need supportive or even need thwarting overall. So in that respect, we say there is it's a guide. The compass serves as a guide to calibrate your ongoing teaching and to make sure you stay at the right side of the compass, navigating between the participative, the tuning, the guiding, and the clarifying approach. And so what I try to do is also bring up some theoretical issues here and some practice-oriented, let's say, things we could talk about. And I think from a helicopter perspective, what the Circumplex model clearly shows is that structure and autonomy support are not conflictual, but very compatible. They are situated next to each other in the Circumplex. That's no coincidence. It's because they easily go hand in hand. And other people have been talking about direct instruction, which would be largely fall within the structure area within the Circumplex, and direct instruction is not at odds with autonomy support either. Of course, if you define autonomy support as independence, as Rich also highlighted, autonomy is not about independence, but if you define autonomy support as independence, of course, yeah, then you could say direct instruction is at odds with independence, which is probably true because you're taking the lead, you're highly directive. In the case of direct instruction, and so you're not granting any independence, but we don't define autonomy as independence, but as volition. And many children are very willingly listening to their teachers and want to be instructed how to move forward and want to be guided. So they are not giving up any autonomy when being guided or being instructed what to do so whatsoever. So that misconception about the tension between direct instruction and autonomy support comes from a different viewpoint on autonomy as being independence, which is not how we would say we can best define and measure autonomy. And then I think the Circumplex also shows that control and chaos can easily go in hand. And I think that also is what's happening on a day-to-day basis in the classroom. Teachers may actually slip or move along the compass. So initially, if a student is distracting the class, they may remind the student of certain agreements, of certain rules in the class. If that doesn't work, he or the teacher may threaten the child with sanctions, so the teacher becomes more demanding. If that doesn't work, he would say, okay, you're behaving like a toddler. How old are you? So you're just domineering. And if that doesn't work, you just kick out the child and you give up. So it is indeed how control can easily go hand in hand with chaos on certain moments. And so I already mentioned here there is room for refinement within each of the broader areas, so to speak, the broader styles, which are subdivided into sub-styles. And I think that breaking it down into sub-styles helps also to maybe understand what teachers are struggling with, or sometimes how SDT has been also, what I see in Belgium, not applied always in the, let's say, the most fitting or the best way. Because, and I give you that example, if, for instance, the participative approach is not correctly applied, it could slip into chaos. And I see instances sometimes where discovery-based learning is promoted or choice is given, but there's not enough guidance. And so what you have there is a situation when choice is not accompanied by sufficient structure. It may be perceived as be too open, too awaiting. And so that becomes a situation where, yeah, the teacher is not optimally supporting the learning of the child, or the teacher, if for instance, may become permissive or lower the standards if the students are complaining. And that's an issue, of course, where you give in to the students. And that's, of course, that's not what we would call autonomy support. It's just a wrong application of autonomy support on that moment. On the other side of the circle, you could also see how structure can slip into control, how being too rigid or scripting children too much and not giving them, building in choices or building in sufficiently taking into account their interests may be something where you are mechanically or mechanistically orienting them towards certain outcomes, and then you become controlling after a while. So structure can, if not correctly applied, also slip into control. Now, another point I want to highlight here is the principle of universality without uniformity. And I think the compass in one way or the other also shows there are multiple inroads to need satisfaction. If you look at the right side of the model, you could be attuning, you could be guiding, you could be clarifying at certain moments. And at the same time, there seems to be some variability in the strength of the association between a style and, for instance, motivation. And that's what we saw before. Well, this gradual pattern actually suggests that the more reliable roads to motivation and to learning are really the needs supportive ones, which is attuning and guiding. There you have the strongest correlates. While in that respect, we would suggest let's move to what we call a more gradual need-based approach. So it's a matter of gradations, and you gradually, when you shift along the circumplex, you gradually change. With those two styles being truly need supportive. And then we said, okay, being participative, for instance, could be need enabling. So you create conditions under which children, if they are given choice, it enables them to get their need for autonomy and competence met, but it's maybe not guaranteed. So in that respect, it's somewhat less strongly predictive of need satisfactions and learning. Then you have the truly need-thwarting areas, which are abandoning and domineering. But you have also what we could call need-depriving areas. So when you're awaiting, it's not so harmful when compared to being abandoning. So there's some gradations here if you move along the circumplex, so to speak. And so in Belgium, let me see, we have also been developing, like I want to show this video, I'm not sure, where indeed the teaching compass is introduced. You won't hear any sound.
Maar hoe hou je je leerlingen echt gemotiveerd? Het leraarkompas helpt je te begrijpen. Het ABC. De A staat voor autonomy.
Let me see.
Naar het juiste antwoord leidt. De twee demotiverende stijlen zijn controle en chaos. Een controlerende leraar eist behoorzaamheid, laat teleurstelling blijken of straft de leerlingen op een onredelijke wijze.
So it's just to show you this animated video where indeed it's made public to all teachers, and so they can learn about it. It's part of a platform, Mood Space, which was also something that the Minister of Education invested in at the time during the COVID crisis. And so a lot of SDT topics are really on the platform. And so it's made freely accessible, because also teachers, when they found out about about that compass, they can fill in the questionnaire I showed in the beginning, and they get a personalized profile. And so this leads me to the question, so how can we make good use of this in professionalizing teachers? And I think we would argue it's a self-reflection tool where you can have a deeper insight in what is your strength. If you complete the questionnaire, you get a personalized profile. What are points for improvement? You can take the wheel or the compass next to you when preparing classes. You have the building blocks, and so you start to think about what kind of building block do I want to take into account for my upcoming class. We talk about the capacity for calibration, which means you calibrate ongoingly between the need supportive areas on the right side, so you flexibly navigate there. And yeah, you can also engage in a dialogue and with students about your style, because if the students complete the same questionnaire, what you can see here on the right side, that is on average at least, teachers overestimate their motivating qualities. Or maybe students are too critical for the teachers. That's also a possibility. But still, there's a discrepancy between the two. And that's often an eye-opener for teachers to actually to start to get interested in the compass and in the work of SDT, because now they find out, okay, maybe I have a blind spot and I want to learn more about what it means to be a tuning. On the left side, this is just also a picture of our recent book, where we try to make it very concrete, what is a demotivating action and how can you find a solution in the compass. And the solution is often situated at the other side of the compass, where you think about, okay, if I was abandoning, so what is then needed is being more guiding, for instance, and so on. So we make it very clear for teachers in primary school, in secondary and higher education. But I think it also opens possibility for intervision and supervision, because yeah, at least in Belgium, teachers are often lacking shared vocabulary to talk about motivating others, and a shared viewpoint. So SDT can offer this. Also, you can start to engage in a dialogue where you try to be open and more vulnerable about your own difficulties to deal with difficult situations. We see teachers being more isolated and trying to work on themselves, but I think it's critical to form learning communities where the campus could play a critical role. Also to learn from positive and motivating interactions. They could visit one another and observe one another in the classroom. There has been some work with the campus as an observation tool. And so in more general, it's a tool critical for mentoring. And we would argue, well, it needs to be given a place in teacher education training in general. And so last week also, there was a journal in Belgium, Klasse called, who actually has access to, who has the challenge or the task of translating scientific evidence into accessible knowledge. And so they came up with this poster, or they created a poster, and every school, secondary school in Belgium, will receive this poster to hang it in the teacher room. With the compass, we have come up with cups, and Richard Ryan had the suggestion also to create a darts board. And you can see a darts board right here because of the book presentation. These gadgets were also created last week or a few weeks ago. So I will leave it here, and so we can engage in a discussion.
Thank you. That was awesome. Okay, we have some time.